All right. Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Steve Turner. Steve, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show.
Thanks. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, you
Appreciate it.
bet. I'll tell you, Steve, I have been so looking forward to this. And I want to start off by giving a shout out to Jessica and the team over at the Podcast Guests platform, because those guys are doing some amazing work. And without them and what they do, I don't think you and I would have an opportunity to even meet each other. So I'm really grateful for them. And when you and I did connect before, we got to have a conversation. I also got to read an article that you had put out that just really, I was like, man, I totally love Steve and the way he shows up. And one of your origin stories just absolutely blew me away. And I'm like, that was way cool. so this podcast, it's kind of twofold. I get to interview people like yourself, Steve, entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, and get you to just kind of share your experience around this topic of relationships, which, in my opinion, as entrepreneurs, relationships are the most valuable asset that we possess. Everything else stems from that. And for the listeners who are also entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs, these interviews, we get to just show up for them and inspire them to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own lives. And so I've really been looking forward to this conversation with you, because what I've already got to know about you, Steve, I'm like I said, I'm stoked to have this conversation and do this interview. And so what I'd like to do is I just want to turn it over to you, so we can set a little bit of context, so you can share, about what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do. And I'm also hoping you'll share that origin story too and give us a little bit of background. So I'll just turn it over to
Sure,
you.
absolutely. Yeah, so we have a public relations firm in St. Louis called Solomon Turner. We've been around for over 30 years. And for at least 15 of that, and we just did it again, is we've been named one of the top PR firms in St. Louis by Small Business Monthly.
Awesome.
So we're real excited.
Yeah.
So that'll be out in their July issue. So that'll be fun. And it's online, people can see it. So that'll be cool. So my beginnings, I was a radio announcer, sports, and kind of always liked the big idea, the form of getting people involved with billboards or TV or something besides radio. And as I progressed through my career in advertising and doing different things, I worked for an ad agency and had a chance to apply some of these things that I like to do. And eventually it just really struck hold with me. And I said, hey, I got to do this sometime. So my radio career kind of fizzled, and I moved back home to St. Louis, where I grew up, and started my own public relations firm. And started by myself, had some connections here, and they gave me a shot, did some things. And then a couple years later, I merged with an ad agency. We were doing business together, and we hit it off. And not only did we become business partners, we became life partners, and we got married.
Wow.
So we became Solomon Turner under one roof. So it was a full and complete merger, as they say.
Yes, it was, wasn't it?
Instant family. I got 2 kids and a wife in the deal. So it's been interesting. So that was a while back. But I've kind of grown from there. We've expanded our business. We've worked with all kinds of clients, Brian Tracy, Anthony Robbins, Coldwell Banker, hospitals, architectural firms, Northwestern Mutual, a lot of names people would recognize. And as far as an origin story, one thing that really kicked off, I think, my career was in the late 80s, the personal development field was really starting to take off. And I had a client at a radio station here in St. Louis that I was preparing for an interview. And in walks this young man with a whole stack full of cassette albums. And in those days, there were no CDs or cell phones. Everything was done basically with cassette if you wanted to listen to a book or listen to some kind of a lesson, you had a cassette. So he walked in with these huge cassette albums, and he must have had a dozen. I don't even know how he got them all in the door. And they were all Brian Tracy. And I was like, this is odd. I've been listening to Brian Tracy on my own for months. And this guy walks in with a stack of Brian Tracy cassette albums. And I said, sir, by any chance, are you with Brian Tracy? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, well, I'm in the PR business. Is he coming to St. Louis? He goes, he sure is. And I'm here to kind of promote that he's coming in. And I said, holy cow, that's what we do. Just give me a few tickets to see him in person, and I'll be pleased as punch to promote the heck out of this thing. And they really didn't have that much money at the time. They were just kind of starting. So he's like, well, let's see. He says, yeah, I'll tell you what, why don't you come to a meeting at our temporary apartment that we've got with my partners, and you can talk to us there. And I said, okay. So I did that, and they gave me kind of the look me over kind of approach with an analytical eye. And they were dying for this deal because they didn't have any money. And it was like, oh my God, I'm going to get a PR campaign for nothing, really, for tickets, which we give them anyway. So we worked out a deal, and we had some amazing results. We came up with this idea of Salesperson Appreciation Day in St. Louis, figuring that salespeople just don't get the appreciation they deserve. And for every person that sells something, hey, you need a pat on the back every once in a while. So we put this together. I was also a member of sales and marketing executives at the time. And I approached the president, and he thought, oh, wow, yeah, we can combine all this together. So we put this whole campaign together around that, and Brian Tracy coming to town as kind of the scoop on the icing on the cake, that kind of thing. So that would top it all off. So we got excited, they got excited, everybody got excited. So we called radio stations and people like that. And sure enough, at the time, the number one radio station in St. Louis was KMOX AM. Okay. They had a phenomenal, they broadcast the Cardinals games and all this other stuff. And their morning show was by far number one in the market. So I had a connection there and called, and they said, okay, why don't you come on? So I did this interview in Morning Drive on KMOX, which was, golden in those days. And it went over well. I mean, that really got some attention going. And it helped these guys sell a ton of tickets to the event. So they're all like, wow, this is pretty impressive. So they go, Steve, we had a great event here in St. Louis. So how would you like to go to Cincinnati and do the same thing? And I'm like, well, okay. And they said, well, this will be a fee thing. And they said, okay, how much is it going to cost? So we came up with a deal. And sure enough, I was off to Cincinnati and kind of doing the same thing as a, pre-event kind of guy, setting the table, working out deals with stations for promotions. If I could get interviews with Brian Tracy or somebody else, I would. So we did all that. And then that went well. And the floodgates opened. All of a sudden, we were headed to Dallas and Houston and Tampa and Miami and Los Angeles. So,
wow.
Yeah, on and on it went. And it was really a blast. So, had I not said anything to that guy in the lobby and just looked and said, oh, that's interesting, and turned away, none of this would have happened. So the funny part of the end of this story is that one of the guys who was working for Tracy went on to work for Tony Robbins. And he said, hey, Steve, Robbins can really use your help. So all of a sudden, we were working for not only Brian Tracy, but Anthony Robbins, and helping him with seminars and different things like that. And then other guys, it was a very tight-knit community. And other guys found out about what we did, and other promoters would start calling. So for a while, they were working with a ton of seminar promoters. So you don't never want to put all your eggs in one industry or one basket, but it was crazy for a while. And it was a lot of fun and financially rewarding. So we did that, and I had a blast traveling all over the country. And one of the interesting things, it really hadn't done much speaking, and we were in Philadelphia getting ready for a big program with Tracy, and there were well over 1,000 people there for this event. And so we're talking, and I said, well, so who's going to introduce Tracy? So Dan, who was the lead partner, he goes, you are. I said, what? Really? And they said, oh yeah, who knows more about Brian Tracy than you? And I said, well, yeah, but thinking about it, talking about it to you is one thing, getting up on a stage in front of over 1,000 people. So I was nervous, as you might expect, pacing around in the back beforehand and all these other things. And sure enough, I got out there and did my 5-minute spiel and handed the mic over to Brian. So I was nervous, but it was a big thrill and we got it done. And that was really cool. So, I mean, there's a million stories about all these seminars and traveling and hotels, this, that, and the other, but it was fun.
Well, that was a pretty awesome one right there, Steve. That was pretty awesome. And, so, I mean, so did that experience of just being in that hotel when that guy came through the door with all those cassette albums, is that the thing that kind of launched your business back then?
I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, we had clients. I had clients. I was kind of a sole operator then. We had clients and other folks, but this really kind of, took it to another level.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, we're doing all this stuff, and it was amazing. And
wow.
They were generous. They were nice. We did a lot of stuff together. I got to talk to Brian several times, and that was interesting. So yeah, it's kind of like lifting the curtain in the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
It's like not exactly what you expect when you really get to know these. I mean, they're humans. So Absolutely. It's like going into the clubhouse at for a baseball team. You see these guys on TV, you think they're like these godlike creatures, and you get them, it's like, well, and it's like, okay, these guys are making $5 million a year or $10 million a year. I'll be lucky if I make that in my lifetime. And, and these guys, they can run fast and jump high, and that's their claim to fame. But that's another story. But yeah, it was a great experience. I loved every minute of it. And, eventually it kind of petered out. I mean, the internet took over, I think, most development training, and everything shifted, and so there was really no need for a lot of these public seminars anymore.
Gotcha.
So yeah, the business moved on, and it was great, and we still did some types of seminars, but we haven't in a long time.
Okay, well, but yet here you are 30 years later, still doing your thing and still serving. I mean, you go to your website and you look at some of the folks that you've served, and it's like, wow, there's some pretty good names there, and it's very interesting because I totally get what you were saying. Well, especially, after, hosting this podcast for the last 2+ years and having over 200+ conversations, interviews, with some pretty amazing entrepreneurs who are running some pretty big businesses. And what has definitely really stood out for me in all this is that, what, no matter how successful somebody is, no matter how big their business is, no matter how great things look from the outside looking in, we're all just doing the best we can with what we got, And it has been quite an experience over the last couple of years, just having these kind of conversations with entrepreneurs who are doing amazing things. But like you said, Steve, they're all just people, right? We're all doing the best we can with what we got, And yeah, so.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of the interesting things that we did years ago, there was a home run race. A lot of people remember this that are old enough. Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were battling out to see if they could break Roger Maris's home run record. This is
remember.
Yeah. And so it was crazy back and forth. Sosa would take the lead. McGwire would regain the lead. Well, it was coming down to this weekend series in September. And I got a call from a guy who said, "Hey, I've got this guy in Chicago who runs a sports memorabilia company, and he wants to come down and offer $1 million for the guy that gets the home run ball that breaks Maris's record. So it'd be home run number 62." So I was like, he said, "Can you help him?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, let's talk." So we put this deal together, and we put together a news conference. I had done some sports reporting, so I kind of knew how the lay of the land works with these guys.
Huh?
So we put together a news conference before the game during the day when these guys are kind of milling around. It's a little early to go to the ballpark, and they've had their breakfast and their lunch or whatever. So we called a news conference and said, "We've got a big announcement and we're going to do all these things." And so we had all kinds of people there. And so this guy, makes the announcement, "We're going to give $1 million away." And, it's on CNN, it's on all, TV networks, it's everywhere. Well, sure enough, that night, McGuire broke the record. But instead of the guy, hitting it in the stands where a fan would get it and, have a chance to get at least $1 million, it was some guy with the grounds crew that ended up with the ball, since it was a low line drive that went into the grounds crew area. And so
Oh,
he got the ball, and he didn't even think about it. He just ran onto the field and gave the ball right to McGuire. He said, "Here, sir, here's to celebrate your accomplishment and giving you the ball." He goes, "Oh, okay, thank you." Well, the kid got some bats and some pats on the back. I mean, it was a great gesture. But my client was like, "Oh no," but because my client would have been in every newspaper the next day in the country, I'm sure. This was like huge news.
yeah,
I mean, this was bigger than just a sports story. I mean, this was like on the front page of the newspapers. This
yep,
was on network television every night. I mean, this was really big stuff. And
yeah,
we had everybody, following this thing. And so my client, we still laid a lot of really good media connections for him, USA Today and some other folks. So he got a lot of mileage out of it anyway. But,
sure.
the big ice cream sundae, so to speak, kind of got away from him. But yeah, it was fun. It was really cool. And it was just one of those things, but a great story. And I had a lot of fun working with them with my partner.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that they appreciate somebody like you and just the way that your mind works and how you see opportunities that they would probably never see and stuff, just because of your background and your experience and your connections and relationships and all of that, is you just see these opportunities that other people aren't necessarily going to see, that can produce some pretty big results, and so.
Yeah, here's another good one for you. But way before COVID, there was the SARS scare,
I
which
remember
was,
that too. I remember that.
yeah, that kind of originated from China and that area, and everybody was scared they were going to get sick and so
Yep.
forth. So there was a lot of publicity about that, and everybody thought this could really break out into some major problems. So I had a client in Louisville, Kentucky called Officeware, and they
Okay.
sold document technology and things like that to different people, keyboards and different things that connect all this stuff. So one of the girls there heard about this, and she created a little anti-SARS kit, or a germ prevention kit, which was real fascinating. It was just kind of she came up with this logo somehow, and I don't know how she did it, but she created a great logo of a germ and some stuff, and put that on the face of this plastic bag, and then put Kleenex and some, disinfectant and maybe one other thing in there. And they started giving that away to their clients to say,
Okay.
"Hey, wipe down your keyboards, make sure you don't get germs." So in the meantime, they said, "Hey, Steve, is there anything we can do with this kit?" And I'm like, this is in the middle of all these news cycles where everybody's talking about SARS. And I said, "Oh my God, this is unbelievable. Let me run with this." So I I called NBC, and about an hour later they said, "Yeah, let's do it." So NBC News sends a crew out to Louisville, Kentucky at this office supply, not an Officeware, the document technology company, not a huge company at all.
Mhm.
And so they're featured on the NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams at the time. So we just took that little thing and turned it into a big deal. And then all the Louisville TV stations picked up on it. The newspaper picked up on it. I called somebody and I said, hey, they're on NBC Nightly News. So they even wrote up about that, the fact that they were even interviewed for NBC News.
That's
So that got
awesome.
picked up. Today it would have been viral, something like this. It'd be all
Yeah.
over the, social media.
Yeah.
Unfortunately it was before that. But, it got great play and it was just a germ of an idea, you might say, and turned into some major PR for them. I mean, major.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. So, it's stuff like that. We see things differently because we're in that business. We're always looking for a story or a story idea or how to turn, a minuscule thing into a big deal. And
Yeah.
sometimes people are sitting on these great ideas. They just don't think about how they could be turned into a major news story or a feature story or even a local story. Um, somebody that competes in marathons and, goes to Boston and, finishes in the top three, crazy stuff that, the ordinary person would think, yeah, it was good. But it's not that big of a deal. Well, it is a big deal. And
Yeah.
we can make it into a bigger one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what we love. We love to do that. We love to take somebody that ordinarily wouldn't be featured in the media or get any kind of attention and make them not a star necessarily, but just really escalate their brand and help them build their business.
Yeah.
Just
That is
love to do.
awesome. That is awesome. Well, okay, so now that we've got a little bit of context, and this is really cool, Steve, because you know I know already there's some folks listening to this that are now they're going, man, I think it would be really cool to maybe have a conversation with Steve. And we'll make sure we get your contact info to them, include that with the show notes and everything. And I'll make sure I get that before we finish the interview. But I want to switch gears just a bit here. I'm gonna reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. And have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Steve, you kind of shared your origin story, but I also know from reading the article that you recently got published that there's more. And so I'm just really excited to hear you share, your unique experience around this topic of relationships.
Sure. Yeah. Nothing happens without a good relationship. Back in the early days of my career, I was still in the radio business and I got hired to do sports announcing and ad sales for a radio station in North Platte, Nebraska.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's a small town, basically a railroad town, a lot of agriculture and so forth, but really great people, really had a good time. So I got hired by this guy named Ed Dahl. And it turns out that Ed is one of these master salespeople that somehow migrated to North Platte. He had been in some other cities. And at one time, he actually went around the country and sold advertising for these syndicated radio shows, which in the day were the Lone Ranger on the radio, Amos and Andy on the radio. This was in the heyday of radio, perhaps even before some of these things appeared on TV or they were sold in conjunction with television. I'm not sure. But Ed was a master salesman. He would go in cold into a city and he'd go into a bank, for an example, and he'd go in without an appointment. And he'd say, I'd like to meet with the president of the bank. And whether it took a half hour, an hour to get that meeting, he'd wait, he'd go in. And 9 times out of 10, or a good part of the time, he would leave with a contract. That's the kind of salesperson he was. And he had a great way of communication. He had that skill where he could communicate with you on a different level and make that connection and build this trust and credibility that you felt confident that this was going to work out. And I think that's what great salespeople do. You buy them before you buy the product or the service they're selling, but they instill that confidence in you that this is going to work out just great. And most cases it does, but it takes somebody to communicate that.
Yeah.
I remember this, I just remembered this as we're speaking. Somebody, so I had been with Ed, and we went out to sell advertising to this one merchant in North Platte. And he said, "Oh, I don't know if I want any more customers. I recently had a heart attack, and I don't know." And Ed says, "Heart attacks? You want about talk about heart attacks? I had a heart attack 5 years ago, and I feel good now. And I really need to build business with us, and you need to do it too." So he kind of communicated with this guy on this other level. I mean, it was more than that, but I think the guy eventually ended up signing the contract. So it was pretty amazing conversation, but that's the kind of guy he was. So I learned a lot about selling in life from Ed when I was a young man, and that was very interesting. So that's kind of how I cut my teeth in that, and later learned more skills in selling. I worked for WHBQ radio for a while in ad sales, and they had a morning show guy named Rick Dees who
I
would go
remember
on.
Rick Dees.
Yeah, he was.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, he became big time. So I was
Yeah.
selling advertising on his show. He was just in Memphis at the time. And then he decided he wanted bigger things. So he went out to LA. He got a syndicated radio show. For a while, he had his own TV show. But he was a real character. And I went around with Rick in Memphis for a while and learned a different kind of selling. They were more analytical problem solving than just, relationship building. But we had a good time doing that. And that was another thing that I think had been really helpful. And then learning the art of networking, uh, which I kind of discovered later on. And then I met a gentleman named Jim Canada, who was kind of the master networker. And Jim invited me to be in this networking group on the ground floor as he was trying to build it. And we had like 8, 10 guys to start with. We met at a restaurant and a hotel, and soon we had like 15 people, and then 20. And the guy running the restaurant, he said, you guys have to go somewhere else. You guys are making too much noise, and I've got people coming in to eat dinner, and a lot of these were older women that would come in at like 5 o'clock, and they're like looking at us, and like, oh boy, this is not good. So management finally said, find another place. So we did, and we grew to about 60.
Okay.
And this is all because of Jim. And he knew people, he knew how to network, he knew how to make connections, and he would give out leads like crazy. And we were the benefit of that. We worked for his company for years, still do, and met people through this networking group and got a lot of leads, and things kind of filtered down. And somebody from the networking group knows somebody else that knows somebody else that needs PR help or wants to talk to you. So it just kind of is this endless circle of connections and networking and feedback and just fun and results.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you're getting a lot of stuff. Hopefully you're giving back as much as you're getting, which is very important in my world. You can't be all take and no give.
Yeah.
You have to have that go-giver attitude where you're trying to solve a problem for somebody. And even if you're never going to get business from that person, it's okay. You're doing a good thing. You're helping somebody out. And if you can't supply the solution they need, you can find somebody that can. And luckily, I believe that I know enough people to help just about anybody through anything, it seems. But in those days, it was interesting to see who could be connected with whom, whose problem was significant enough that it needed immediate attention. Uh, who could you make some phone calls, make some emails, see if you could connect somebody that could help them out of a rut or an issue they were having. So there's always those kinds of things out there. And in my world, it's about giving as much as it is receiving. And I really don't worry about it. Brian Tracy used to talk about the law of reciprocity, which means if you do something good, eventually it'll come back and you will receive something good. And so it always does, something will happen. Oh, I met this guy 5 years ago that knew you, Steve, and he referred this guy and that guy and this guy. And he said, well, you could help me with some PR. I said, okay, sure. Let's, I'll be glad to have that conversation. So you just never know.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I love to do personally, and we've always made it a point at our agency. If there's a way we can help you, we'll do it. And it doesn't have to be financially related. You don't need to do business with us. If we can solve your problem, we're just excited to be able to do it.
Wow. What an awesome outtake and way to look at relationships. And I know that article that you recently have published, I know that you talked about that you have relationships with clients still to this day from your interaction with that group of gyms that he started years ago and stuff, and that you are still serving clients to this day that you met as a result of that way back when, you know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, the timing of this, because I just got a call last week from one of those people, and he says, "Yeah, can you help us with this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." He's one of the best guys I've ever met, and so sure, you don't even think twice, you just do it. So, but that came, through a connection through that networking group like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, it just keeps going and going. And, if you do good work and, and you make good connections and people are happy, they'll keep putting your name out there,
Right.
saying, "Hey, I got this guy that can help." And we try to do the same thing on our end. If somebody needs IT services or an accountant or a lawyer or, whatever it is, we try to help them with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is awesome. Well, Steve, I can assure you that at this point, there are people listening to this that's going, man, Kev, I really like Steve. I love how Steve shows up. And I've never even maybe considered PR, or maybe I have considered PR, but I didn't know who to talk to. And now, after listening to this, I'm thinking like, man, maybe it might be worthwhile having a conversation with Steve and just kind of exploring some things. And so, for anybody that would want to get connected with you, what's the best way, Steve? Is there a website, email? What's the best way for us to include some contact info?
Yeah, you can check out our website, solomonturner.com, and there's all O's in Solomon, SOLOMONTURNER.com. You can Google me, Steve Turner, PR, St. Louis, and see some of the articles and different things we've gotten. And you can always email me, sturner@solomonturner.com. So any of those ways will work. And the phone number is 314-205-0800. And if you want to send me a plane ticket, I can be there in, I don't know, 5, 6, 7.
There you go.
if you're really in straits. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that we don't do just traditional media. I know people think of like newspaper, TV, radio. We do a ton of social media, and we leverage what you get in the newspaper and TV and radio, and make sure it's seen on LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever your key social channels are, Instagram, even maybe TikTok if it's a video thing. So there's ways to leverage that. So I don't want to leave the impression that we're really old school or we're not up on trends. We are, and we can help with that as well. So if somebody's looking to build their brand on social, we can find ways to leverage articles, interviews, different kinds of things, podcasts even, to really build the brand and give it some legs and help you move forward.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Steve, I am so appreciative of you for taking the time to have this conversation today. Any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
No, thank you. I appreciate the time, and I would just, people that want to build their brand, take a good look at where they are, what their competition is doing, what are your competitive advantages? Do you have a good story to tell? Most people do. And it's just a matter of packaging it the right way and then telling it, figuring out the audience and what's going to make the most sense, whether it's trade journals, consumer publications, could be the NBC News, it could be the Today Show, whatever makes the most sense. And find the audience that best fits your product. The research is easy. You can anybody that's been in business for a while, has a sizable business, knows who their customers are, they should. And, psychographically, why they buy, who they are, what do they read, what do they watch, what do they listen to, and then you can match that up with your campaign and escalate your brand and get it out there and increase sales and revenue in the long run. So love doing that, working on those kind of campaigns and helping people sort through all the analytics and put something together that'll work well for them.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Steve, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to just share from your heart, have this conversation today. And I'm totally stoked to get this interview out there and share it with a bunch of other entrepreneurs. So thanks again so much. Really appreciate you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it too.
Absolutely.